Start recording. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the 80s ADHD Guy with none other than Ben Glenn. I am sitting here right now drinking a Venti Starbucks. In the afternoon, I like to have a Venti mocha with an extra shot of espresso. So it's kind of a sweet treat, you know, especially if I got a really good workout in the morning. So if I come off a little bit hyper, I don't know if it's definitely not the caffeine, because they've done studies that caffeine actually calms down the ADHD brain, but this thing is chock full of sugar and, of course, whipped cream. Got to get that whip. So we're diving into the symptoms in the diagnostic criteria of what somebody has to have consistently to receive the diagnosis ADHD. And disclaimer again, because I believe this is podcast number 5. Whoa. Cranking through the pods, Betty boy. This is the unabridged, unleashed, unfiltered, not performing, being authentic Ben Glenn, who grew up in the 80s with all of the special ed stuff. If you ever have seen me perform or watch or look at my stuff on Instagram for my events, I always perform with a t-shirt that has the letter S on it. It resembles the Superman logo. One, it's just accessible. I can find them everywhere. But the joke is, the connection is the letter S. You know, they told me I was special in the 3rd grade, and forever and ever and ever and ever, it was an embarrassment. It was something I would hide. It was something that my brothers would, especially Sam. If you're listening to this, Sam, dude, you were a butt stain. You used to torture me. And that's what brothers do. I mean, it was joking. I mean, and that's where sometimes I struggle. We now live in a time where there's this big awareness of bullying. Okay. And so when I worked with my students for 3 years over at the church as the youth pastor, I learned very quickly that their idea of bullying in the 80s idea of bullying is a little bit different. I mean, bullying back in the 80s was a physical altercation. It started verbal, but then it would always escalate to physical. And now it is more just verbal or social media. You know, somebody posts something, somebody says something. And the interesting thing too is I think that there would be less bullying if people actually had to say these things that they were thinking or feeling or whatever to somebody's face. You know, if I can post and hide behind the security of my phone, and I can post my critical critique about whatever it is that I'm critiquing, as harsh as it may be, I don't see the physical response of hurt on somebody's face if I'm hiding behind my phone in social media. So back in the 80s, if you said something or felt something and you had the courage to say something to somebody, you had to actually say it to their face. Or you said it to somebody else's face, and then it would kind of trickle through the grapevine, and somebody would hear, I heard what you said about me, Ben. And you'd have to have a physical, connected confrontation. And so, you know, bullying probably does start with that verbal teasing and whatnot. But, you know, growing up with brothers and stuff, I mean, he never bullied me. I mean, we'd wrestle and stuff. And the truth of it is I could kick both my brothers' asses. Okay. Hands down. And I hope you guys are listening to this. Hey, Sam, do you remember when I would do the whole Hulk thing? So back in the 70s, they had the Hulk, and he would get picked on, or somebody would hit him, or something would happen, and David Banner would, like, you'd see these weird eyes, whatever, and they were contact lenses, and he would change. And it was like, I would literally do the same thing with my brothers, and I would make sure that it was communicated, and I would say, that made me mad, and they would run. scared to death because they knew I was the stocky one. And the truth of it is that, hey, I may be 50, but I can still kick your guys' ass. So, I don't know where that was going with all that, but you guys just got the full flavor of an ADD moment right there. So, bullying today it looks a lot different than it did in the 80s. And I can remember Sam growing up, I had to get a tutor once. And oh my gosh, I'll never forget this. Dude, I'm 50 years old and I remember exactly what he told me. I think I was maybe in the third or fourth. I just got diagnosed and the school said, well, he's going to need a tutor. I had no idea what a tutor was. So I went to my older brother. I'm like, I'm going to go ask Sam. That's what we did when we didn't have the answers. When Chris and we didn't know, things, we go ask Sam, which when it came to like sex things, that was a mistake. So I go to Sam, I'm like, hey, dude, what's a tutor? And he's like, oh, man, I can't. Really? You're going to a tutor? Have you ever heard of torture? Torture, tutor? See how it kind of sounds the same? And he created so much anxiety and fear in me, and he knew it. He could see it on my face, that when I actually did go to the tutor and she opened the door, it was a sweet woman, mom who helped students. But when she opened the door, I literally responded with a little, because I was all expecting some horrific kind of a wicked witch from the West kind of a person with a big pot, a cauldron. It's kind of fun word to say, cauldron. If any of you guys are questioning right now my ADHD, I just proved it right there. So, again, this is Unabridged, Unfiltered, Ben Glenn. And in the last podcast, we started jumping into the symptoms and the diagnostic criteria, which gives somebody that label, ADHD. And we had just wrapped up talking about hyperactivity. So now we're going to jump into, and there's 5 here. I think there's a few more. Again, for those of you that are listening to this and not watching this, I went online. I thought, hey, I'm going to go online. I'm going to access all this information that is available to you guys all through the World Wide Web. And now you've got other apps that you could even dive into more. And I think that the challenge is that now there's so much information. We live in the information age, that knowing what is real, knowing what to listen to. I mean, everybody wants to be an influencer. Everybody, wants to share their opinion. I can remember watching this reel, and I will tell you that reels are frustrating. I am one of those individuals that wants to be an influencer, and I do really believe that God has put on my heart to share and be an encouragement and to inspire people and to just come alongside individuals who are struggling, trying to simplify things and just, share my story, share my humor. So I want to be one of those individuals, but I'm one of many. And so there are a lot of people out there that are saying things that are not necessarily backed up by anything factual. And I have given this disclaimer from day one. I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I am a coach. I am certified to be an ADHD coach. But as far as the things that I'm sharing, I will be the first one to say, these are my opinions. And then also my opinions are based on my experiences, my conversations, and then having been out there for 30 years, meeting and talking to people about their stories and even the things that I've read and continue to read. So I'm trying to stay updated with all the information. But again, I want to make sure this is my opinion. But you can go out there and there's so many places you can find this information. I mean, now you could ask chat, and I think that'll be a podcast all on its own, just diving into how do we feel about Chat GPT-3 or whatever it's called. And then you've got one of my favorite apps is Perplexity AI. It's a search engine, and what it does is it literally surfs all of the, I don't know if it's like Google, Bing, whatever, but Yahoo, I don't know. But it gets all the information from all of the websites and different things and Pocket, and then it kind of like shrinks it down into a very, like a summary. And there's no advertisements. There's no, hey, this is a sponsored thing. And that's the thing that when you go to Google, the first 5 things are all sponsored. I just want to get to some information. And so this is what I found out there. And we touched on the inattention. That's one criteria. The next one was hyperactivity. And then we're going to jump into impulsivity. And that has been described as blurting out answers, difficulty waiting a turn, interrupting, and intruding on others. How do I, as the 80s ADHD guy, feel about impulsivity? Well, I will say that I believe, from my experiences, this is the biggest issue with ADHD. Those other ones have a tendency to take a front seat or get more attention because of the academic connection. So if you think about, hey, we've got these kids and we're putting them in school and we need them to sit still and we need them to pay attention and we need them to produce, and then we're going to test them to see if they're actually retaining the information. And when they're not, and the test scores are crap, and the school gets nervous because, the test scores are crap. Well, we're going to address all of the academic stuff first. When, to me, the impulsivity is that one that, oh my gosh, if we don't start teaching young people how to slow down, how to become self-aware, what kind of safety guards or safety rails or whatever you want to call it to protect themselves from impulsivity, well, a lot of these guys are going to fall down a very difficult road. I love to call that road stupid pit. Some people don't like the word stupid. So if that's you, I apologize, but I do because it's fun for me to say. Sometimes when you're impulsive, part of that impulsivity drops you down that stupid pit. You do not want to be the mayor of stupid pit. And the problem with ADHD is that you can fall into that stupid pit many, many, many times. That's the essence of impulsivity. You can fall down that hole, and then you can have people help pull you out of that hole. And because you're impulsive, you end up right back in the hole. There's this really funny reel where this farmer has a sheep or a goat or something, and this goat has jumped into like a little ditch, and it's kind of a deep ditch, and there's a creek or water. Maybe it's something for irrigation, I don't know, but it's fairly deep. And so you see this farmer laboring over to help this animal out of the ditch. The thing literally jumps 3 steps and then goes back into the ditch. That is the perfect visual of ADHD and impulsivity. It's a huge issue. So I think that when Googling a lot of these different things and trying to get information as it would relate to ADHD, this feels very academic. This feels like, okay, blurting out answers. Well, that's something that happens in school. Difficulty waiting turn. There's another school type feel. Interrupting and intruding on others. That could go both ways. So that impulsivity is something that never goes away. So, this is where you want to lean on a coach. This is where you want to, one of my favorite safeguards is before I make a big purchase or before I make a big decision, I go to what I like to call my sympathetic enforcer. That could be a coach. That could be a teacher. That could be a counselor. I don't know. It's that person that you give permission to enforce something that is in your own best interest. Thus, the sympathetic enforcer. You have given them. It's almost like trying to remember the terminology, where you give somebody the power of attorney. Because if you're not in your right mind, if your brain has been hijacked by something, the shiny gremlin, well, then you're going to want to have that person that's going to act in your best interest. I got to get a little swig of this coffee. You know, when you get towards the end, you got to shake it a little bit because of all that chocolatey goodness at the bottom. Oh, yeah. If you ever get up to Minnesota, they have Caribou coffee. And I've been everywhere. I've traveled all over the world. And there are some places that these coffee shops are local. Some of them there's only one of them. But in the northern states, you can find Caribou coffee. And if you get a mocha, they typically give you a coffee or a chocolate-covered coffee bean. And it is delicious. It's so good. Again, there it is. Shooting these podcasts in the morning, I think I'm a little bit more focused. For those of you that have binged this pod, I am now shooting this. It is 3:30 in the afternoon, and I'm feeling good. We'll have to do a mixture of both because, I don't know if you're entertained, but I'm having a good time with you guys. So back on the impulsivity thing, I think that having a sympathetic enforcer is super important. When you're dealing with a young person, somebody who is elementary, middle school, high school, that's a really difficult thing because we can't forget that they're still kids. As a parent, you have to be able to decipher the puzzle between, is this the neurological issue here? Is this a product of the neurological development disorder, ADHD, or is this because they're just kids? And what do we know about kids? Well, kids can be lazy. Kids are defiant. Kids are always going to pine for their independence. Kids are always going to leave their stinking socks laying around, at least in my house. So I think that you have to try to figure out who, maybe not the parent. And I know there was a few podcasts ago where I talked about how, I think it was the second podcast where I talked about adults that are like-minded with your goals and inviting them in to be the difference makers or to influence your kids, because at some point your kids are going to be defiant. Your kids are not going to listen to you openly. And so if you put yourself in the role of a sympathetic enforcer, what you might end up with is a lot of butting heads. You're going to end up with a kid who's going to be stubborn. And even though, common sense inside of them says, well, they're right. Well, I'm not going to let them know that they're right because, I'm a kid, so I'm going to be disobedient. So I think that you've got to find somebody. And here's the other big challenge to all that is that now we're talking about expense. This stuff isn't free. I don't coach for free. One, you don't coach for free or you don't counsel for free, because when you do, it's easy for people to, one, take advantage of you. There's no boundary set. And there also needs to be a value placed on your time. Time is the most precious thing that we have. And so if you're a parent who needs to put your child in a situation where outside adults can influence them in a manner which is consistent with your morals, your ethics, and your beliefs, well, you might have to get creative because you may not have the resources to say, hey, I have the money to go pay a coach. And a coach can make anywhere between, and on the very, 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 very low end, like $40 per session. But I Googled it. It goes all the way up to like $225 a session. And let's say you're doing that every week. Well, that's just going to add up. So what do you do? Where do you put your kids? Well, that's where you open yourself up to, well, maybe they need to join a sport. Maybe they need to get involved with some kind of an extracurricular activity where you trust and believe that coach or that instructor is going to be a good encouragement and a good influence. And then on the back end, this is a big one. You've got to communicate with those individuals. Couple episodes, episode 2, when I was talking about my boxing coach pulling me aside saying, hey, Ben, can you share a few of these things with my son who's not willing to listen to me, even though I'm an Olympic award-winning Hall of Fame boxing coach? Can you share these things? And that's through communication. Don't just be those individuals that just dump your kids off and not have any communication with those adults. And I say that with a little bit of tone because as a youth pastor, it was very rare when I had a parent reach out to me and say, hey, can we grab coffee? Love to chat more about my child. It was, hey, this is your job. I'm dumping my kids off and I'm taking an hour and a half or whatever off. Well, you as the parent are with your kid longer than anybody. You know your kid better than anybody. And why wouldn't you want to bring that person who's wanting to invest and pour into your child more information about how to connect with them, how to reach them? Like, how nice would it have been if some of these parents would have said, hey, you know what? My child's really into race cars. Now, when they come to Sunday night and I see them isolating off by themselves, I can now go with the strategy of, hey, I'm going to ask them everything that I can about race car driving. But, because there wasn't that communication, well, I had to guess and I had to try to figure things out on my own. And it just makes things a whole lot more difficult. So I think that, back to the impulsivity, you do need to have somebody when you're dealing with younger individuals, outside influences that are like-minded helping you. But you have got to communicate. Mom and dad, please. Okay, take this wrong. Don't be lazy. Do not sit on your ass and do nothing. You need to communicate with your coaches, your teachers, your youth pastors, whoever it is that is pouring into your kids. It is not, don't sign that off with, hey, this is their job. This is what they do. This is what they get paid for. No. If you truly believe that your kids are your greatest investment, then you need to get off your ass and you need to communicate and take the time to invest. And I'm a little edgy on that one. Because in my 3 years, I might have had a coffee with maybe 4 parents out of the 80 students that came to my program. Why is that? Don't have an answer. And you know what? I also say that as an encouragement to myself, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have not taken advantage of just dropping my kids off at something and just relaxing. Because let's be honest, parenting is exhausting. It really is. And then you roll in all of the other things that you have to go along with it. But here's the thing, it's a short time. It really is. I mean, my daughter, she just turned 19. She graduated last year, and she is in that process of learning how to adult. She's adulting. I think that's a funny phrase. My youngest daughter is now 17. So I've got her for a couple more years, and she's learning how to do different things. And right now I'm trying to be as involved as I possibly can. And it takes time. It really does. I mean, yesterday, here's a great example. My daughter, she's on spring break, and she wanted to go do some things, and she was having my oldest daughter kind of be the taxi driver and navigate all those things. She was sick, and so then it fell on me. And at first it was kind of an annoying, like, oh my gosh, I got things to do. I've got to, A, B, C, and D, and I've got to be productive because I'm the man, I'm the provider, I got to get it done. 80s mentality. And I had a moment where I was just like, you know what? This isn't going to last. I need to go and hang out and have some fun. And we really did. I got the chance to meet a couple of her friends, which I was really honored that she was not too embarrassed for me to meet her friends, because sometimes that's a thing. And we had a really good time. We played laser tag, and we played some cards. And so it was a really good time. And I think it'll be a really good memory for her. But it did take some effort on my part to shift my mindset. I believe Stephen Covey calls that a paradigm shift, to where it was, okay, work's always going to be there. But my kids, eventually, they're going to grow up and they're going to be out adulting. There's that word again. So continuing on the topic of impulsivity, we need to then move into, okay, well, once you graduate from high school and then you go off to college and then you graduate college and then you enter into the workplace, how does that look then? Because mom and dad no longer are going to be there. And I say that very loosely because I do know that a lot of kids are now going to college and then they're moving back home. And I know that that's a thing. I don't have a whole lot to share on that because my kids haven't gone off to college and have come back home. They're too young. Give this podcast a few more years and I might be able to talk more into that. But I do know that is a thing. And it's interesting because when a kid goes away and then they're out there adulting and trying to figure out things on their own and then they come home, what I hear a lot is that there's a lot of butting of heads. Parents are always going to continue to be a parent. I'm 50 years old and my mom still treats me like I'm, a high school kid. That's just how it is. And, one of my favorite movies of all times is Grumpy Old Men. And even better is Grumpier Old Men. And there's the dad, the old dad. He's like in his 90s. And these two guys that are like in their 80s or 70s, they're kind of having a fight. And he comes out of this little fish house and he yells at them. And he says, "You kids, how many times do I got to pull you guys apart?" They're not kids. They're in their 70s. But he still sees them as kids. And so I think that when somebody gets a little bit older, now we need to have hopefully taught them the value of finding a sympathetic enforcer or putting themselves in a position where they can have access to somebody that they can bounce things off of. Because what you don't want to do, especially when you start having to make your own money and put together a budget, it's amazing to me how many young adults have not put together a budget. They all need to listen to some John Ramsey. But when you are an impulsive person and you've got to, pay the bills and you got to pay the rent, you got to pay the mortgage, you got to pay, well, the rent and the mortgage, same thing as, hey, if you're paying a mortgage and you're a kid, that's pretty good. That means you figured out how to buy a home, but you're paying the rent, you're paying your car payment, your insurance, your phone, all of those things. I mean, it just adds up. Everybody wants a piece of your money. I sat down with one of these young men. He is 20 years old and he's asked me to coach him. And we put together a budget and we went through all of his expenses. And he basically has $100 a month to eat off of. Exactly. That was me swigging some more coffee. And that's one thing you shouldn't be doing every day. If you're on a tight budget, don't be drinking Starbucks. That stuff's expensive. And I will say, I'm very proud my daughter treated me to this coffee. I don't get this every day. Thank you, Annie. You have to figure out when you're a young adult how to find that sympathetic enforcer. And that's where maybe, this is where you can lean on a church. I know a lot of churches have young adult ministries, and there are a lot of things that are there that are free. There are a lot of people there that are like, hey, it is my heart's desire for God to use me in this way. And so I want to minister by mentoring, a young person and helping them. And so there are ways where you can achieve that relationship with a sympathetic enforcer for free. And I think that that's super important, because what happens a lot of times is we're like, well, I just don't have the resources and the money to do this. Therefore, it doesn't get done. And then it just, you continue to find yourself falling more and more into stupid pit. And then there's also this idea of, well, I don't have the money, but actually you really do. Because if you take your finances and you look at where you're impulsively spending it, well, next thing you know, you're like, oh, wait, if I take that 20 some plus dollars I spend a week on Google Play, if I take the, 20 some plus extra dollars that I spend on fast food, and you start to take those frivolous things that you're spending money on and you bring them together, next thing you know, you've got an extra $100 that you can hire a coach with. And here's the value there is that if you're taking your hard-earned money and you're having to sacrifice from the entertainment, because really, let's call it what it is. It's entertainment. You then are going to take that relationship seriously. You will then be more willing to listen to the guidance and the coaching of that individual when they say, hey, this decision that you are contemplating is very impulsive. You are making an emotional decision here. Give it a couple days. Because when you're impulsive and you see that shiny thing, next thing you know, you've purchased it, you've laid down the money, and you didn't think it through. Next thing you know, you're coming home with a puppy. I had some people that I worked with, and they were young, and I knew that they struggled financially, and I had actually offered to help them budget and do different things. And this individual was extremely ADD, and every time we would have a conversation, it was all about their money woes. And every other month, it felt like they bought a new puppy. It was just weird. Like, wait a second. You are struggling financially, and now you have 3 dogs. And dogs aren't cheap. I mean, you take your dog to get their nails clipped at the vet. That's $25. $25 just to have their nails clipped. I tried clipping our dog's nails, and it doesn't go well. And then on top of that, you got all the dog food. And I don't know why dog food is so expensive, but it is. I mean, if you get a decent sized bag of dog food, I mean, my goodness, that's $20 right there. So all of your money is going towards this animal. And so you, because of an impulsive moment, because you decided, hey, I'm going to go visit the pet store because I'm looking for something free to do on a Friday night, and you come home with a puppy. I mean, come on. That's where you need to have access to somebody that, hey, I am paying you so that I can, text you or call you and say, hey, I'm feeling this incredible impulse to buy this puppy. Can you please counsel me, guide me, be my sympathetic enforcer? So Paulina, my wife, the Russian, she is my sympathetic enforcer. And that is another interesting dynamic because she is my wife, and that doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. You have to, I believe you have to have a very unique, special relationship with an individual, with your spouse to be able to make that work. And I won't lie, there are days where it doesn't work. There are days where she will step in, and if you've ever been around somebody who is from Russia and there's this difference in culture, it's not very soft. There's not a whole lot of beating around the bush. It's a very matter of fact. And I can remember we dated for literally 2 weeks, and then I dumped her because I couldn't handle that personality. That very much like, I'm going to tell you the way that it is, and I'm not going to worry about your feelings. I have grown to love that and appreciate that. And it has definitely helped me immensely. But yeah, we dated 2 weeks and then I dumped her. And here's the funny, because now some of you are like, well, you got to finish that story. How'd you end up with her? Well, she never went away. She never, I mean, growing up in high school and stuff, I dated and broke up with different people, and that was the end of it. But I can remember, like, a week after we broke up, she gives me this call, and I'm on the phone with her, and I'm like, didn't we break up? Did you not get that memo? And she's just like, you're such a butt. She's like, we were friends a long time before we tried dating. And you're going to tell me just because we tried the dating thing and it didn't work, we still can't be friends, like real friends, and go hang out and do stuff? And it made complete sense. I mean, there was no response other than, oh, wait, yeah, you're actually kind of right. And so we ended up being friends for a really, 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 really long time. And I actually dated a lot of other people while we were really good friends. And then one day God gave me that holy slap upside the head. And I realized, and I knew it. I'm like, she's the one. And maybe we'll dive into that in a later pod. Because ADHD in relationships, oh man, that's where you really see ADHD as a struggle. When you try to cohabit with somebody that has to endure, understand, and live with your neurological development disorder. So we might have to bring her on as a guest, have her talk a little bit about it. But if you are married and you are worried about the relationship and the health of that relationship, being that you have ADHD and she or he does not have ADHD, because let's be honest, girls can have ADHD too, you know? And so it may be where you just have to say, hey, let's figure out how to cut the budget a little bit and hire somebody that can be that sympathetic enforcer. And that way you can, especially if this is early on in your relationship. I mean, if you just got married, you don't want to be like, hey, I've got this neurological development disorder, and you may or may not be aware of the severity of that. And now that we're living together, can you be my sympathetic enforcer? And no, because then they're just going to feel like a nag. And then you're gonna maybe even feel like they're nagging you. And I think that the reason why it works so well with Paulina and myself is because we actually educated ourselves together. We were married for 3 years, and she just was getting frustrated with a lot of my ADHD stuff. You know, I'd start a million projects, never finish anything. I'd get depressed because of different things, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And so she's a researcher. She's somebody who has mastered the art of Google. And I remember coming to me and just saying, I think you have this ADD thing. And it's right around, it was the late 90s, where it was right when they really started figuring some things out, and kids were starting to get medicated, and they were seeing some really good results. And so we went and we started doing some research. And it's actually when we came across this book by Dr. Hallowell and John Rady called Answers to Distractions. They wrote a book called Driven to Distractions, but the book Answers to Distractions, shout out to both of those guys, because I believe that book saved my marriage. And so going through that book and being able to identify and see myself in all of these different areas and all of these questions that were being asked in that book then led to me going and getting officially diagnosed through a psychologist. And because she was willing to do the research and to get to know and understand ADHD, it helped her to know how to work with me, to challenge me. And because I knew that she had my best interest in mind, and because I did see the struggle that it was having on our relationship in those first 3 years, it really did make a huge difference. And that's, why it worked. So I can't necessarily say I don't recommend it, but I also know that Paulina is a very unique woman. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you have somebody who's unique and that works and it doesn't trigger you, and I know that word trigger actually triggers some people because it's gotten a little overused, but it's a good visual to what can happen. If you're in the middle of a impulsive moment, or you've done something that is a little bit out of the norm and extremely hyperactive, because sometimes in a social setting, when you're with your spouse, sometimes what you can do is embarrass them or say something that was just, you'll say it and you're like, oh crap, can I get that back? And you've got to be really mindful of that relationship. And in some cases, it might even be one of those things where, hey, we're going to pool our resources together and scrimp and scrape and maybe shut off our Netflix for a little bit and cancel our Disney Plus so that we have enough money to go get a counselor. Because then that counselor can come alongside and hopefully that counselor will be a little bit more aware, especially these days. I mean, this is such a much more well-known thing. How do you take an individual who has ADHD and bring them with somebody who does not have ADHD and figure out a way to have a successful relationship? The one thing that I can't speak into at all is if you have somebody who has ADHD who ends up with somebody who has ADHD. That actually might be an interesting thing to look for, is somebody that I could bring on as a guest who has ADHD, who married somebody who has ADHD and has a whole bunch of ADHD kids. So, yeah, I'll probably like book the date for them to come and be on, and they just never show up because they're all over the place. Anyway. All right. Well, we're slowly but surely getting through the symptoms and diagnostic criteria, because this is just a fun, loosey-goosey podcast where I'm just letting my brain go crazy and wild. We still have a couple more to go. And so, per usual, I do try to wrap these up in about 40 minutes because I don't want to be as long as an hour, and I want to be a little bit longer than 30 minutes. I think 40 is that sweet spot, and we're right there right now. So, thank you guys for listening. Again, as always, every time I get a follow and I see that number grow, it does inspire me. It is not my sole motivation. My sole motivation is to be an encouragement to you. And so if you've got any questions or just want me to dive into something a little bit deeper, please leave that on whichever platform you are watching this on, and I will try to find it and answer it as best as I can. All right, you have an amazing day. And as always, love, peace, and Lego bricks. God bless.